A person described as a top banker by the Financial Times says that the Trump win has finally allowed them to feel free to openly use as many slurs as they want without fear of repercussion. Once again, proving that for a lot of people, the appeal of Donald Trump was just allowing them to be the worst version of themselves that they can be. I feel liberated, the banker told the paper. We can say the R slur or the V word without fear of getting canceled. It's a new dawn. Really? Let me tell you about cancel culture. It was never real. It's a bunch of people choosing not to engage with you or not to buy your crappy stuff or whatever based on like, wow, it seems like you're kind of a bad person. But at the end of the day, this cancel culture, at least when it comes to a lot of celebrities, they end up doing better somehow. They get Netflix specials, okay, and get paid millions of dollars to go and complain about how canceled they are. So, yeah, cancel culture. Okay, yeah, sure. How's that working out? Oh, actually, it's working out pretty good for you, since now that is your entire personality. That is your entire grift. Lovely. Now, getting back to this different banker, he said, or they said, most of us don't have to kiss ass because, like Trump, we love America and capitalism. Whose butt is he kissing? I don't know. I mean, what it makes me think of, and maybe I'm wrong, but he's like, I'm thinking talking about the customer, right? Oh, we don't have to kiss the customer's butt anymore. Okay. Well, look, in my mind, that makes me think that Wall Street, the bankers, these corporations are getting ready to bend all of us over. Okay, and that's it. Now, these quotes are part of a broader report about the way that corporate America now feels unshackled thanks to Donald Trump. And unshackled they will be, okay? Not only can they throw slurs at you, but they can also basically gouge you, overcharge you, do whatever, okay? It's a Gilded Age 2.0. That's what's coming, okay? They know that once he takes power, it's open season on the American people. Now, first they're starting with diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? DEI. In fact, since Trump had won the election, you had Amazon, Meta, McDonald's, Walmart, Molson Coors, Ford, John Deere, Lowe's, Harley-Davidson, Brown-Forman, which is the makers of Jack Daniel's whiskey and other beverages, Tractor Supply Company, and Toyota, putting out announcements that they're ending the DEI initiatives, right? Which is basically making sure to hire people that are, from disadvantaged communities, okay? You've also got a lot of these companies pulling out of pride events. So, of course, to me, this shows me that all of this was nothing more than a cynical attempt to try to make money from these groups by pretending to be more inclusive. And as soon as they got any sort of pushback or anything like that, they fold. Cheap suit, okay? It all falls apart like a house of cards, like it always was. This was rainbow capitalism. This was rainbow washing their image to be like, oh, no, I'm in support of all these, this equity and making sure that, we treat LGBTQ people like human beings, they're black people, and give them a chance. No, it turns out we never really meant any of that. Please, right-wingers, keep buying our products. Now, this is also a reflection of the culture. The culture today, and it's amazing how fast it shifted, right? But it feels much more restrictive and way less tolerant than it was before. And look, maybe it was always that way, and a lot of us didn't really notice it. But either way, it's much more openly restrictive, and there is a pushback against tolerance. Imagine that being your major problem here. We are too tolerant as a society. We must be more intolerant. Okay. Yeah. But here you have major financial players, major bankers saying things like, "Oh, thank goodness, I could do slurs again. Yes, yes, it's what I've wanted to do all along, is to say slurs, the N-word." Because like when I know people like talk about free speech, right? This is just bringing back free speech. No, it was never about free speech. You know why? Because you can't even accurately define free speech. I actually do believe in free speech. I don't think the government should come after you for having an opinion that happens to be, against the government or against what the government is doing or a government official. I think you can talk about those people however you want. That is free speech. You're able to have a redress of your grievances and to be able to air them without the cops coming down and busting down your door. That's what the First Amendment is actually about. That's what free speech is about. Just read it. Okay, that's all you have to do to understand. Free speech doesn't apply to corporations. Okay, unless of course when it comes to their lobbying, but because that's considered to be, free speech because money equals speech now in our society. But when it comes to the average user on like Facebook or Instagram or X/Twitter, whatever, right? You actually are not guaranteed free speech because that entity is not the government. So they can actually regulate if they want to. Okay. But here's the thing. Free speech does not mean that you don't have any consequences for the things that you say. It just says the government cannot be the one to met out those consequences. It is up to, if they so choose, through their own policies, for the company policies, to ban you. Okay? So, to put it plainly, free speech does not mean that companies have to tolerate someone being bigoted and shouting slurs. Imagine somebody in a shopping mall shouting the N-word repeatedly, like you would see on Twitter, right? And how is that functionally any different than saying it on Facebook? I think the only difference would be consequences, right? You do that at the wrong mall, and you're going to get kicked out or worse, all right? But on Facebook, well, it used to be that they would either limit or ban your account. Now, after Zuckerberg's changes, now after Elon Musk took over on X and got rid of the trust and safety team and changed a whole bunch of stuff, you can say whatever you want now, right? And that's it. Now, here's the thing, right? You might be like, well, it's censorship. It's good. They got rid of censorship. It's free now. Well, okay, but here's the thing. A sensible rule is to not say things on social media that you wouldn't say in real life to someone's face. All right? That's the rule that I've tried to follow throughout my whole life. Don't say things to people online on social media that you wouldn't tell them to their face, right? Because, you might be afraid of the reaction, or it just might be an incredibly hurtful, terrible thing to say. But since we're not talking face to face anymore, a lot of people don't follow that rule. Okay. And now a lot of these, thanks to Donald Trump and thanks to the right wing being so successful in their messaging of conflating what free speech actually is, now you've got these companies that have completely got rid of a lot of their guardrails, which would, otherwise prevent or at least tamp down on the levels of abuse that you see online. So the result is, if you thought that being on social media was bad enough, just wait. Just wait till your coworkers, your bosses, even your bankers, okay, start being able to openly tell you what's on their minds, because that's what we're doing. That's what they're doing now. Trayer Bryant, a former DEI executive at Goldman Sachs and Twitter, who is now the chief executive of a consulting firm called Pathfinder, had quoted Maya Angelou in a statement about all this. Here's what she said. When people show you who they are, believe them. When companies show you who they are, believe them as well. Sage advice. And we are going to remember who these people are, who these companies are, because at the end of the day, I think they need to be reminded that they need us more than we need them. The special counsel report on Donald Trump's election interference case has been released by the Justice Department. I'm actually surprised that Merrick Garland allowed this to be released and that the Republicans were not able to stop it. But hey, there it is. And hey, maybe I guess they didn't stop it because what good will it do now? Since the case is not going to go to trial. But anyway, nonetheless, the final report describes the unprecedented criminal effort by Trump to overturn the legitimate results of the election in order to retain power back in 2020. Something that you would think that people would care about, you know, the lying, the trying to cheat, the attempting to usurp democracy. You know, people, you think they would care. But apparently they did not, because you had enough people who elected him again. Before that happened, of course, the now president-elect faced 4 charges: conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of or attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. And according to Smith, they had the opportunity to go to trial, to actually adjudicate this in court, it would have been game over for Donald Trump. Here's what he writes. The department's view that the Constitution prohibits the continued indictment and prosecution of a president is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proof, or the merits of prosecution, which the office stands fully behind. Indeed, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. So he's saying, if it would have been to trial, we would have got him. We would have got him. Wow. Of course, we'll never find out now, because at the moment, there's not going to be a case. It's
bing, 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 boom. It's gone.
For now. Now, it's important to note what could have been. And based on the evidence that was gathered here and the strength of their case, Trump lucked out major. Volume 1 of Smith's report meticulously outlines Trump's alleged actions, including the efforts to pressure state officials, assemble alternate or fake electors, and encourage supporters to protest against the election results, which led, of course, to the January 6th Capitol riots. Smith writes, significantly, he made election claims only to state legislators and executives who shared his political affiliation, Republicans, and were his political supporters, and only in states that he had lost. So if there was a concentrated issue of election fraud, right, then wouldn't he have tried to make this case in all the states, because all the states vote? But he didn't. Only in states that he lost that would have helped him win that election. And really get the way that he went about all this shows you the intent was not to, we need to secure our elections and stop voter fraud and all that stuff. No, the whole intent was, I want to take this election and I want to win it. Through by hook or by crook. It doesn't matter. I want to win because I am a winner. And if I lose, I'm actually still the winner. That's the mindset here. Now, the report also addresses Trump's persistent spreading of demonstrably, and in many cases, obviously false claims about the 2020 election. I mean, do I really need to go into some of that stuff? You know, where, for example, Sidney Powell got her conspiracy theories about the ghost of Hugo Chavez changing election result of Venezuela. We got Venezuela. You got all the Mike Pillow stuff, which again, Trump bought into. Trump bought into all these different conspiracy theories. Anything that would help him retain power. Now, all of those conspiracy theories also served as the basis for Trump's pressure campaign and contributed to the January 6th attack. Now, what it didn't contribute to is all of his court challenges. None of those conspiracies were actually involved in these court challenges at all, because in court, you actually have to present facts, okay? You actually have to present things like evidence. And so a lot of their cases were procedural stuff. Oh, you changed the rules too soon before an election. You allowed more people to vote as a result of COVID. COVID measures. You expanded voting. Boo, we hate that. No, that made us lose. No evidence of any of that stuff, okay? They couldn't present anything in court to back them up, to back up any of their assertions. Rudy Giuliani famously losing over 60 court cases. And so, that's the reality. So the court's got something different than everyone else. These Republican politicians that he tried to pressure, as well as the MAGA supporters out there, were getting fed something completely different, and it was all pretty much conspiracy theories, nonstop. All right. So now, look, you probably have heard a lot of this. Probably already know a lot of this because a lot of the evidence cited in the report is already public. Okay. But there are some new details that we didn't know. For example, this is one avenue that the prosecutors did not go down. Okay. At one point, they had considered charging Trump with inciting the January 6th attack on the Capitol under the Insurrection Act. Now, prosecutors were like, that charge would pose too many legal risks to our case. And we don't have the sufficient evidence to back that up, saying that we don't think that Trump, or we don't know that Trump intended for the full scope of violence during the riot. Now, that said, intent obviously matters, but at the same time, when it was revealed that, the full scope of the violence was happening, he was sitting there watching it on TV with bated breath, right? And I think personally that he was enjoying it. But again, it's kind of a subjective thing, right? My opinion on that. Nonetheless, I mean, and I'm not the only one who thought that he might have been enjoying it too much. There were a lot of calls for Trump to put out a statement, to, say something like, please stop. And it took him a long time to get to that point, all right? A long time. And that's at the point where it wasn't actually going anywhere. That said, okay, didn't have enough evidence to do the Insurrection Act charges, right? But all the other stuff, it was already enough. Based on what we already know, there was a good chance that Donald Trump would have been convicted and likely have faced prison time had he not been elected. So naturally, you would think that, hey, Donald Trump, you owe the American people, the American voter, you owe them for keeping you out of prison. They kept you free. You owe them. Now, is he going to return that favor? Of course not. He's going to rob us. He's starting with Medicaid. All right, they're already talking about gutting Medicaid. So, and a lot of other things as well. And it's going to be a disaster. He's going to repay us with higher prices on groceries. He's going to repay us with higher prices on pretty much everything. Less insurance, higher health insurance, premiums, deregulation in the markets. I wouldn't be surprised if there was, an economic crash under Trump. But we'll see if that happens, all right? Or some other calamity. Think of another pandemic. Oh, he's going to basically repay us with signature incompetence and grift. So, expect that. Now, that said, he responded to Smith on his on his platform
Truth essential.
by saying this: deranged Jack Smith was unable to successfully prosecute the political opponent of his boss, crooked Joe Biden. Why was he unable to prosecute? Oh, right. Never made it to trial. Never made it to trial. Delay after delay after delay that Trump and his team, his legal team, pushed for. Yeah. And of course, you could also point at Merrick Garland for waiting so long to appoint Jack Smith. All right. There's more. So he ends up writing yet another report based on information that the Unselect Committee of Political Hacks and Thugs illegally destroyed and deleted. I don't know what he's talking about there. Because it showed how totally innocent I was and how completely guilty Nancy Pelosi and others were. Guilty of what? I mean, all right, you want to go after Nancy Pelosi for insider trading? You might be guilty of that, as is most of Congress probably is. All right, but related to January 6th, no, no, not guilty of anything. Now, Smith addressed his charges, at the Select Committee, okay, saying that the House's committee work, the House Committee's work was only a small part of the office's investigative record. Smith's team interviewed more than 250 people and obtained grand jury testimony from more than 55 witnesses. In addition to that, Smith's team also said that Trump had deceived many people, him and his team. For example, the fake electors. They were told that they were just signing up to act as fail-safe electors in case that the litigation by Donald Trump's team was successful. The co-conspirators deceived by Mr. Trump's elector nominees, Smith writes, in the targeted states by falsely claiming that their electoral votes would be used if only if ongoing litigation were resolved in Mr. Trump's favor. In fact, one of the fake electors in Wisconsin, Andrew Hitt, he told CBS News last year that Trump's team had just flat out lied to him. Quote, if I knew what I knew now, I wouldn't have done it. It was kept from us that there was this alternative scheme, alternate motive. Which, by the way, again, these fake electors were, basically part of the plan to say, hey, look, Mike Pence, all you have to do is just not certify. We've got guys waiting. We got these electors waiting to just hand us the election. If you want it, Mike, all you got to do is the right thing. Just do the right thing, Mike. Help us steal it. Help us pull off this robbery. And Pence, to his small credit, did not do it. Didn't go along with it. Although at this point, it doesn't matter anyway. Now, he also determined that Trump had never believed, despite his public and private lies to the contrary, that he had won the 2020 election, and cynically chose to leverage the violence that broke out during the January 6th insurrection because it was beneficial to his plan to interfere with the certification. The through line of all of Mr. Trump's criminal efforts was deceit, knowingly false claims of election fraud, and the evidence shows that Mr. Trump used these lies as a weapon to defeat a federal government function foundational to the United States' democratic process. I mean, yeah, but like I said, it doesn't matter anymore. The coup is complete. He won. And this time, it was a legitimate win. So, but it's just a continuation of the efforts. The judicial system, Republicans in Congress, and others, they allowed for this to happen by not holding Trump accountable when he actually did these alleged crimes. That's it. That's the reality. And in allowing him to skate through, not get touched by any consequences, that actually made his position stronger in this election. Americans like a winner. Okay? Americans like somebody who, is able to get away with everything. Because he can spin it as like, oh, they were fake efforts anyway. So, Just ignore them. And people did. Now, the report concludes with a quote from Trump, falsely saying that he has complete exoneration. Quote, that is false. The department's views that the Constitution prohibits Mr. Trump's indictment and prosecution while he is in office is categorical and does not turn on the gravity of the crimes charged, the strength of the government's proof, or the merits of the prosecution, all of which the office stands fully behind. I already read you that quote, but I think it's important to point out that they quoted Trump and then said, yeah, his quote's false. It's BS. Now, there's one more thing. And that is, at some point, we're going to have to assume that Trump will no longer be in office, right? Now, if that's the case, remember, this case was dismissed without prejudice. That means that in 4 years or whatever, right? I mean, assuming that he doesn't run again, even though he's constitutionally barred from doing so, that another prosecutor could potentially take on this case. Assuming, again, he doesn't have any sort of special protection. This case could be brought again. The only question, of course, in my mind, if that happens to be there, is would there be anyone left in the government who actually possesses the stones to do it, considering what has happened to Smith, considering what has happened to all of this? I wish I knew the answer to that question, but I think it is important to ask. But for now, I think it's important to see what could have been versus where we're at now and where we're going. Speaking of where we're going, I do believe that in about 50 to 100 years in the future, when historians look back on this moment, this little piece of our history, I can tell you that I do not believe the books will be kind to Donald Trump or those who enabled him. The attempt to steal a Supreme Court seat in North Carolina has been rejected by a judge. Now, that rejection comes in response to a request from the Republican National Committee, the North Carolina GOP, the Wake County GOP, and two voters who wanted to toss out nearly 60,000 ballots cast in all November 2024 statewide races. Now, this has to do with the re-election of incumbent Democratic Justice Allison Riggs. She had retained her Supreme Court seat by a small margin. We're talking hundreds of votes, right? Against the challenger, Jefferson Griffin. Now, the results of that election was confirmed by two separate recounts. So there is no question that Allison Riggs has won. Now, that should be the end of it, right? Well, it wasn't. Those Republican groups have been trying to disenfranchise 60,000 legal voters so they could dominate the North Carolina Supreme Court. That's it. I mean, they already have more seats on the court, but no, nothing more than total domination. Now, they're claiming that tens of thousands of ballots should be thrown out because an alleged paperwork failure, right? So they're saying that the voters did not provide their license or social security numbers on their voter registration applications. According to the GOP state board, a named defendant in the case processed over 225,000 voter registration applications prior to December of 2023 without collecting the required identification information and have failed to take swift action to identify and remove so-called unqualified voters from the state's voter rolls. Now, this is pretty much identical to a separate RNC case filed back in August of 2024, which a court had dismissed in part ahead of the November general election. In a January 2nd motion for a preliminary injunction, Republicans asked a Wake County Superior Court judge to order the election board to immediately set aside these challenged ballots, contact voters to request missing information, and remove from the final election tally ballots cast by voters who were unable to provide the necessary identification. Now, of course, the judge in this most recent order concluded that careful balancing of the equities cannot conclude by the greater weight of the evidence that a preliminary injunction is necessary to prevent immediate and irreparable harm. So what exactly happened here? Okay, well, it turns out that there is a voter ID law in North Carolina. So if you have to go to vote, or if you actually go to vote, sorry, then you have to bring your ID. Then why would you need that on your voter registration application if you're just going to go to the voting place and show your ID anyway? It doesn't make any sense, right? Why they're obsessing over this, unless of course you realize that it is about trying to obstruct legal voters, trying to disenfranchise them, keep them from voting, okay? Keep their ballots from being able to count because they lost this election. That's it. So the DNC noted, because they got involved as well, that all the registrants at issue proved their identities when they had first voted as required by law. Yes, by showing their IDs. And so there it is. Additionally, the Republican challenge was proven to be broader in scope compared to a previous challenge by Griffin himself, since it not only sought to remove the ballots in the state Supreme Court race, but also in completely undisputed state and local races. So this is classic Republican overreach. Not only are they like, yeah, get rid of the ones in that race that we lost. No, not just those, but let's get rid of all of them, all 225,000. Oh, yeah, let's disenfranchise all them people. Wow. Now, another point to note, unlike Griffin's lawsuits, the recent GOP action did not raise any claims against ballots cast by certain overseas voters. So that was something that Griffin was trying to do as well. Now, but here's the thing. This basically was an attempt by the Republicans at voter suppression based on technicality. So what do I mean? The form in question did not have a box for you to write your driver's license number or your social security number. And at the end of the day, you don't really need to have that box, but or those boxes, but apparently that is now state law. Okay? But that state law, not having those forms, that's not the voters' fault. Why should their votes get thrown out for something that was a paperwork error? It's the state board of elections' fault. Okay? And in their brief, the DNC argued that the GOP seeks to, quote, delete the votes of tens of thousands of voters in every state and municipal election, not because those voters are ineligible or did anything wrong. They're quite eligible, as they already had to show their ID, but because of an alleged record-keeping problem. The DNC cited state and federal laws that establish that once an eligible voter is added to the voter rolls, a minor issue with their registration application is not grounds to nullify their vote. Yeah. Last week, Democratic Justice Anita Earls had also argued, and she's one of the people on the state Supreme Court. She said at bottom, the timing of Jefferson Griffin's claims speaks volumes about their substance. By waiting until after the votes were cast and the results tallied, Griffin seeks to retroactively rewrite the rules of the election to tilt the playing field in his favor. She also argued that he had no proof of his claims. These legal arguments rest on factual assumptions that he has failed to prove. These claims, sweeping as they are, could and should have been brought long before voters went to the polls. From the court's indulgence of this sort of fact-free post-election gamesmanship, I dissent. Now, the majority Republicans on the court were like, let's hear your case. Let's hear your case, right? But it turns out this case was a nothing burger, okay? These lawsuits have been rightfully rejected because, once again, there was no evidence of any kind of fraudulent activity or any proof that these voters were ineligible, okay? And so there's no reason to throw out all those votes. That said, here's the problem that I see with all this. All right, even though this is a victory, This challenge is going to continue to be the norm going forward every time a Republican loses now. Okay, they lose, they're going to go straight to the courts. Why do you think that MAGA wants to control the judiciary? They control the courts, they control the elections. That's why it was such a disaster that Democrats haven't paid as much attention to these court races as they should. Okay, because the Republican Party, since Trump, has successfully reshaped the judiciary, and they were very, very, it's very, very effective now, and it's having huge repercussions all the way up to the Supreme Court, which has made a lot of very bad decisions when it comes to democracy. But it even filters down to these lower court decisions. And so these Republicans, if they lose an election now, they immediately go right to litigation. That's why these cases matter so much. Race is one of the few Democrats on the bench in that state. Now, her decision, her being able to fight off this challenge, does mean that Republicans not only lose a seat, but I'm hoping that maybe next time, instead of, trying to get the court to steal a race that they didn't win, maybe they should, I don't know, go out and try to actually win the next one. The wildfires that are devastating California, destroyed tens of thousands of homes, killed 24 people, and have done over $200 billion, some upward up to $250 billion worth of damage, and caused, economic losses. So those two things combined, those fires are now among the costliest in recent history. Now, what if I told you that not only did we know this was going to happen, but we could have avoided it? How? The wildfire, unpredictable. Is it? That's exactly what happened. In 2019, the California State Climate Task Force had been warning the government that doing endless development in the state's high-risk wildfire zones was going to end up being a disaster. What happened? They did it anyway, and it was a disaster. Why did they do it? Because the real estate developers made bank. As the lever explains, in recent years that have returned, efforts to reduce high fire risk development, which sounds insane, right? Like, wait a minute, you're going to develop real estate, housing in a place that is prone to burning down? That doesn't sound like a smart idea, does it? Apparently, though, they don't care if it's smart because it makes them money. So now this, the efforts to try to reduce that development have been stymied by some very powerful real estate and construction interests. So this is all lobbying, this is all industry. The industry has successfully fought against limits on development for wildfire safety and even beat back safety standards for houses in fire-prone areas. So, I mean, anything that might mitigate or prevent entire neighborhoods from being burnt down, as opposed to like a single house. Well, I mean, no, can't do it. No, unacceptable. That means less profit for us.
Can't let that happen.
Now, that obviously not only puts homes at risk, but it puts people at risk. 24 people, as I mentioned, had died so far from these wildfires. Tens of thousands of people are without homes, possibly more. But look, the lever had uncovered a lobbying blitz against a state bill that would have limited new home construction in the state's most extreme fire risk areas, including some of the Los Angeles neighborhoods that were engulfed in the most recent fires. In fact, Democratic State Senator Henry Stern, who had previously lost his home in the 2018 Woolsey fire, okay, this guy was like, my house burnt down in the last giant wildfire. So maybe we ought to stop building new houses in wildfire areas because I don't want people to go through what I went through. Well, that makes sense, right? Now, His bill would have barred development in very high-risk zones, with exceptions for cases in which local fire agencies adopted a comprehensive plan for wildfire risk management. Okay, so what happened to that bill? Fail. The effort to kill it was led by the California Building Industry Association, the lobbying arm of California's developers and building contractors, an industry estimated to have generated more than $60 billion in residential building revenues in the state in 2024. $60 billion. So they're building houses. They're building lots of houses. Now, the bill, after languishing for nearly a year after it was first introduced, it died in committee. Now, you can't blame this one on Republicans, all right? California is Democratic control. But what you have is a case of where the industry has captured the government. And they do all sorts of lobbying. Now, here's the thing. You could argue that, Jeff, you don't understand. They have to keep developing more houses. You've got to develop more land. You've got to build more houses. We've got a housing crisis in this country. Yes, we do. We do. Now, the problem with your argument, though, is that this is all new housing. That's luxury housing. Okay, that's what's going on. They're not building affordable housing. They're building luxury homes that are very high priced. And so you're not really doing anything to solve the housing crisis by building luxury condos and mansions. All right. As Jack Ide, a Los Angeles-based urban planner and environmentalist, told The Lever, there's no money in affordable housing, but there is far more profits to be found in expanding suburban sprawl into undeveloped land. This incentive structure has driven development increasingly into risky fire zones, abetted by promises of trickle-down improvements to housing availability. No money in affordable housing. And that's it. That's the reason. It's all profit. These high-risk zones usually sit at the edges of the suburbs, where homes sit next to undeveloped land. In these wildland urban interfaces, that's what they call them, fires are most likely to begin. Now, that said, California is very dry. And as a result of course, climate change, it's sometimes goes months and months and months without any rainfall whatsoever. So it just takes a little spark in these areas and boom. Dry conditions, high winds, and look, this land is already wildfire prone. All this together, boom. And that's it. Now, you got a big problem. Now, that said, you know who doesn't deal with this problem? The industry. Yeah, they profit from this. Who profits from the development? Industry, obviously. Who profits from the rebuilding after everything burns down? You guessed it, industry. You build new houses. And here's the thing, right? Who pays for the cost of when wildfires sweep through the area, destroy all these homes in very high-risk areas? The taxpayer. That's who. And look, insurance companies, this is why all the insurance companies are ducking out. They're like, no, we can't afford to do this anymore. These are high-risk areas. We're not going to cover these areas, okay? Because we are going to lose our shirts. So that's what's happening in California in these areas. It's also what's happening in Florida as a result of climate change, the hurricanes. And so insurance companies, they do believe in climate change. And they do have these risk models that they base what they're going to cover, who they're going to cover on. And right now, there are these places where it's like, it's too high a risk for us. We just can't do it. And when your insurance company ducks out, you got a problem, okay? So now, these companies, not the insurance companies, but the companies, the real estate developers, they do not get held accountable for building and developing in places that will eventually end up burning down, being destroyed. And this is all because of these lobbying groups. We end up having so many homes obliterated due to these wildfires. It's because of their efforts. Okay. Char Miller, which is kind of an interesting name, Char, an environmental historian at Pomona College in Claremont, California, said this, quote, "There's landscapes into which we move that we know are high severity fire zones, and we are given the green light to do so by city halls, county governments, planning boards, zoning commissions, architectural boards. They've all signed off on this." Now, her point was that this is a political problem. This is a policy issue. And it's a policy issue, she says, that has been shaped by decades of influence by the state's real estate interests. The state has seen developers and real estate interest groups again and again intervening in government through their lobbying to push against wildfire safety standards. Groups like the California Building Industry Association, which pushed back against a proposal made back in 2021 that would have required towns or cities to create fire safety standards before moving forward with developments in very high risk fire risk zones. The California Building Industry Association's president, Dan Dunmoyer, who makes $500,000 a year, called the proposal a, quote, no growth strategy, saying its goal is to make it harder to build housing outside of the urban corridor. No, you can't just build houses everywhere. All right. You can't do that because there are some places which are going to be disaster areas that are going to burn down quicker. Okay. That's a problem. And it's not just like your house that burns down. These wildfires destroy entire neighborhoods. That's one of the issues. Now, additional developers that also lobbied on that bill included two of California's master plan committee developers, as well as Brookfield, a global real estate investor and developer. California Building Industry Association has also advocated, sometimes successfully, for weaker wildfire safety standards. Now, think about that for a second. We know that climate change is making things drier in California, is contributing to dry season. So having weaker fire standards, lobbying for that, while knowing that, hey, climate change is actually making these dry seasons even worse and increasing the risk of these devastating wildfires, that, I don't know, it should be criminal, in my view. Now, that said, because of regulatory capture of the government, okay, they have captured the regulators. These industries have lobbied the lawmakers. They can get away with it. For example, that industry association recently pushed a bill through the state Senate that would have abolished the state's current fire risk classification system entirely in favor of more limited mitigation zones. Now, that said, luckily, that effort has stalled, okay? But the weaker approach had the support of Governor Gavin Newsom. So, yeah. Look, there's a lot of factors involved in this, okay? In these wildfires, climate change, you got the real estate, lobbying, you got the population, all this stuff, right? High winds. Though at the root, a lot of what we see from the damage here, because again, wildfires do happen in California, and if they're happening in unpopulated land, well, that's much better than having entire neighborhoods get absolutely just demolished, by these wildfires. Okay. But when it comes down to it, putting those houses in those danger zones comes down to greed. These groups in these industries, they obviously privatize the gains from selling these houses, developing that land, and then socialize the losses. When it all gets burnt down, they don't have to pay anything. So they're doing all this profiting off your peril. In fact, last year, the same lobbying group backed a bill that environmentalists warned would have allowed developers to redesignate very high-risk fire zones as lower risk. Wow. Evading building code requirements and opening up the door to even more development in risky wildfire corridors. This is just an example of straight up naked greed. And if that's not bad enough, it actually gets worse. A bunch of landlords are getting caught price gouging the survivors of these fires. There's a popular information review of rental listings, which revealed dozens of properties where the landlords sharply increased their prices since the fires began on January 7th. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, supply and demand, right? Some of those landlords increased their rent by over 125%. Jesus. Now, California does have laws against price gouging during emergencies, and Newsom just recently declared a state of emergency, right? Now, the law prohibits hiking rental prices by more than 10% for 30 days after a state of emergency is declared. So now Popular Info, when they looked at it, yeah, they found a lot of home rental prices went way up. Again, 50, 60, over 125%. And then, after a little while, these landlords were like, oh, there's a anti-price gouging law? Oh, no. And so, right back down, the price goes down to within that 10%. Dragging it up, sometimes as high as 9.9% or 9.95 to hitting 10% exactly to get as much money as they can out. Now, of course, they were trying to find, they're finding out the hard way. Okay, violations are punishable by up to a year in jail, a $10,000 fine, or both. And so they wanted to avoid that. Okay, weird. I keep getting told that laws protecting consumers don't actually work. No, it turns out they kind of do. I mean, they're still charging, within the law, but at least they're within the law. And at least there is a law, because without it, we see what happens. But at the end of the day, all of this is an example of how our current system, capitalism, and greed is absolutely destroying us, wrecking lives, destroying entire communities, and screwing over survivors. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, hit the bell icon in order to get notified whenever a new video is released. And if you want to support independent, progressive media through this difficult time where it seems like everybody is shutting down, you can become a member on our YouTube page, you can become a subscriber on Facebook, or you can go to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf. Thank you.